right, welcome back. Today we're going to start talking about meiosis and sexual life cycles. So this is chapter 13 of Campbell's biology. So starting off with concept 13.1, offspring acquires genes from parents by inheriting chromosomes. So we should start off by first defining asexual reproduction. So in asexual reproduction, an individual passes along all of its genes to its offspring without the fusion of gametes. This produces a clone or a genetically identical individual from the parent. This means that every gene that the parent has, the offspring will have, and it will express it in largely the same way. And it will act and respond in largely the same way. Lots of organisms operate this way. Most bacteria operate in this realm, or prokaryotes operate in this round. And a lot of eukaryotic unicellular organisms operate with a similar principle. In sexual reproduction, two parents give rise to offspring that have a unique combination of genes inherited from the two parents. So let's stop and think about this a minute. So living organisms are distinguished by their ability to reproduce their own kind. And heredity is the transmission of those traits from one generation to the next. The important part of variation is that it's demonstrated by the differences in appearance that the offspring show from their parents and siblings, right? So the importance of variation here is in that producing offspring that are slightly different from their parents. They both have the potential of being able to survive in an environment better than their parents. Now, this isn't a surefire bet. This is also a gamble that that offspring might be less adapted to that environment. Now, the field of genetics is simply the study of heredity and variation, and now flows downward into molecular genetics and molecular biology into how that actually plays out on a molecular level. Now, something to keep in mind is all of these traits are not being passed directly, right? So in a literal sense, the children do not inherit any physical traits from their parents. All they do is inherit the genes. Now, those genes do give rise to those particular traits, but oftentimes how those genes give rise to a particular trait can be very tricky, very muddled, and involve multiple genes working together at the same time. So genes are the units of heredity and are made up of segments of DNA. That gene would include all the information that would be for a particular protein. So it would carry the sequence for that particular protein, but it also carried the genetic material surrounding that sequence that is responsible for determining how that gene is expressed. So each gene has its own control mechanism of when and where it is expressed and how much of it is expressed. All those parts of the DNA are also considered to be part of that gene. Now, genes don't always give rise to a protein. Keep in mind that there are a lot of RNAs that operate on their own. Think about all the RNA that is in ribosomes. Those are also considered genes. So these genes are giving rise to something else, either RNA or proteins that are going to operate on their own. All right, now genes are passed to the next generation from reproductive cells called gametes. This is what we would collectively refer to sperm and eggs. All that DNA is packaged up into chromosomes, and humans have 46 chromosomes in our somatic cells. These are all the normal, typical cells in our body, exclusive of our gametes, eggs and sperm. So all of our cells in our body have 46 chromosomes, with the exception of eggs and sperm. Now, along a chromosome, we identify different locus, and that locus is a specific position along that chromosome. That locus will undoubtedly have some type of gene associated with it, but a particular locus might also be a collection of genes. So let's keep flowing directly into concept 13.2. So fertilization and meiosis alternate in sexual life cycles. So life cycles. Life cycle is the generation to generation sequence of stages in the reproduction history of an organism. So let's think about it from our perspective. So each pair of homologous chromosomes includes one chromosome from each parent. So we oftentimes number our chromosomes. We have a chromosome number 1, and we have 2 copies of it. We have a chromosome number 1 that originated from our mom, and a chromosome number 1 that originated from our dad. Same is true for chromosome 2 and chromosome 3, chromosome 4. One is coming from each parent. But along that chromosome, it carries the same overall flow of genes at the same locus. The thing that might be different is the particular sequence of a particular gene. Okay? So the 46 chromosomes that are in our somatic cells, we have 2 sets of 23, one from our mother, one from our father. We refer to these cells, these somatic cells, as being diploid cells. So they have 2 copies of our DNA. So remembering that chromosome 1 and chromosome 1 from mom and chromosome 1 from dad have the same genes, right? They may be slightly different variants of each other, but they are the same genes. We, in essence, have 2 complete sets of our DNA. So for humans, our diploid number is 46. So 2n equals 46. Now, we also have these things called sex chromosomes, right? So these determine the genetic sex of an individual and are labeled X and Y. Human females have 2 X's, and genetic males have 1 X and 1 Y. All of the remaining chromosomes are more or less identical to each other, with the exception of minor specific sequence changes. These are all called autosomes. So we have autosomes, 22 of them, and sex chromosomes, we have 2 of those. So a gamete, an egg or a sperm, have a single set of chromosomes. So we refer to it as haploid, or 1n. So in humans, the haploid number is 23. The diploid number is 46. This is exactly half of 46. So each set of 23 chromosomes consists of 22 autosomes and a single sex chromosome. Okay? Since a female has 2 X chromosomes, referring to a genetic female, the unfertilized egg will always have an X chromosome. Okay? The sperm cell, which in a male has both an X and a Y, could be either, but it won't be both. Okay? This means that it is largely the sperm which is determining the genetic background in terms of male or female for our offspring. Now, fertilization occurs, and that is the union of the gametes, so the egg and sperm come together. Fertilized egg is then fused into a single cell, and that cell is now called a zygote, and now has 1 genetic set of chromosomes from each parent, making it now 2n again. This zygote will then go through a series of mitosis, so a bunch of divisions. Each one of those cells will then develop into a diploid cell. So at sexual maturity, we have ovaries and we have testes. These will begin to produce the haploid gametes that we can then pass along to our offspring. So these gametes are the only types of human cells that undergo meiosis rather than mitosis. So meiosis results in one set of chromosomes in each gamete as opposed to two full sets. Fertilization and meiosis alternate in life cycles to maintain chromosome number. So put into a schematic, we have male, female, all diploid cells, with the exception of the eggs and sperm, which arise from the testes or from the ovaries. These go through meiosis, which produce a 1N sperm and a 1N egg. These then come together to produce a 2N zygote, which will then go through rounds of mitosis and fully develop into an adult organism. Now, this is true for most animals, right? This is what we see over and over again. There might be subtle minor variations in this, but the overall flow is the same. We have 2N organisms running around doing stuff that produce 1N gametes, which are single cells, which then come together and reform a new zygote. In many plants and algae, uses a slightly different paradigm. Here we have a 1N organism that arises from a 1N spore, which is a product of meiosis. That 1N organism will grow into a multicellular, in this case, plant, right? So in this case, the actual organism is a 1N thing. It will then produce specialized cells that will then come together with specialized cells from another copy and fertilize, producing a 2N zygote. Now, this is where it can vary. In some particular subtypes of organisms, this 2N zygote will mature into a multicellular organism that might be living all on its own complete plant. In other cases, that 2N zygote is actually living, being housed by a haploid organism. So you can consider a fetus living within a mother. Oftentimes what we see is this zygote kind of living within one of these parent single N plants. Now, this zygote itself will mature into some type of form and go through rounds of meiosis, producing spores, which are 1N. We can extend this further and take a look at fungi and some protists. So those are single cellular kind of animal-like organisms. Here we have, again, 1N organisms swimming around, doing stuff, caring about their day-to-day lives. They are the product of meiosis. They will then undergo a phase, since this is oftentimes dealing with a single cellular organism. That organism will go through a phase where it gains the ability to fuse with another 1N organism that will undergo the process of fertilization and produce a 2N zygote, which will almost immediately go into meiosis, producing these 1N offspring. So we have 13.1, offspring acquired genes from parents by inheriting chromosomes. And concept 13.2, fertilization and meiosis alternate in sexual life cycles, and this can occur in a variety of different ways, depending on what type of organism you are.